Good evening, everybody. Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Good
sir.
evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Vishwas here, Kolkata.
Yeah, sir, Dr. Gupta here.
Hello, I am audible, Dr. Sagar Chawle.
Yes, it's audible. Audible and visible.
Hello, Sagar.
Hello, sir. Hello. Am
How
I
are you?
audible?
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
What are you presenting today?
Yes, sir.
Non-invasive vagal stimulation device.
Okay. Sagar,
Yes, sir.
only recently I have been telling my colleagues in yoga that how Brahmari stimulates, or even Omkar stimulates the vagus nerve through diaphragm, through eardrums. So it's interesting to listen to you today.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening,
Good evening, Shubha.
Dr. Sagar, Dr. Gupta,
Good evening,
Bhaudista, Dr. Bhora, Amon.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, yes, Dibojyoti. So, actually, today there are 6 presentations. In addition, Dr. Rakesh Gautam from Kulu, he will also present a spot case. And chairperson Dr. K.C. Sharma and Dr. Ratna Magota, they will also join. They have given the word.
Hello, Basu.
How are you, sir?
Fine. Nice to see you after a long time.
Same with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is coming. Okay.
Dr. Gupta ji,
Ji, sir.
you introduce Saurabh when he will present.
Okay, sure. It's coming.
Ratna ma'am, your CV was not with me, but I have collected from the net. There are so many things, so many outstanding works you have done, really remarkable.
You can
It
fix
may
everything.
take a lecture.
Two lines to you. I wrote 2 lines to you.
I've collected it from the net, so I'm just from that I will tell.
Welcome, ma'am Ratna. Ratna
Thank you,
Vishwas from.
How are you? Very good to see you.
I
Very
am
good
fine.
to see you.
We are meeting each other after quite long time.
Keso, you please project the slide of Ratna ma'am first. Let us start the meeting. Actually, today it is the second meeting of the Association of Rural Surgeons of India, their academic meeting. And today there are many stalwart surgeons who are working not only in the rural areas, but they have made a lot of contribution in the country, national and international contribution. And really we are very proud of them that they have linked themselves with this humble association of Rural Surgeons of India. For example, Ratna Magota ma'am, she is a practicing pediatric cardiac surgeon at Srimati S.R. Mehta and Sir K.P. Cardiac Institute of Mumbai. She was the head of the Department of Cardiovascular Surgery at GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. She has been actively associated with Sane Guruji Manav Seva Sangh in Amravati, and we have heard her to give some deliberation, scientific deliberation in our Rural Surgery Association conferences. Really amazing works she is doing in the rural area too, along with her work in the city of Mumbai. She had having the brilliant academic career with numerous national and international awards, and the list will be very long. And we are very much proud that she is very, very passionate about the rural healthcare in India. Our next chairperson is Dr. K.C. Sharma. Another chairperson, Keshav. Yes, Dr. K.C. Sharma is a renowned and popular surgeon from Udhampur of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. He is the past president of our Association of Rural Surgeons of India. He made many innovations. It is about 50 items, not only in surgery, but also in other medical disciplines. He has written many books, not only on the medical subjects, but also in philosophy and on religion. and he had also many publications in the national and international journals. His recent innovation, particularly is a special variety of apple, which is rich in iron, is recognized and appreciated all over the country for preventing the iron deficiency death in children and pregnant women in the country. Thank you. Welcome, the chairperson. Let me hand over the mic to the chairperson to continue with the proceedings of our today's meeting. I just announce that Dr. Dr. Saugata Rai will speak. Will be not the last speaker before Dr. Thorat will be the last speaker, and please accommodate Dr. Rakesh Gautam to present his podcast. Rakesh is here. Dr. Rakesh.
তুমি আমাকে একটা ছোট নোটপ্যাড দিও না গো এখন
Dr. Rakesh, are you here in the meeting? Okay, if Dr. Rakesh joins, he will also present his podcast. Dr. Ratna ma'am and Dr. K.C. Sharma, please start the proceeding.
Thank you, Dr. Maitri. It is a privilege to be associated with such eminent people. And I'm really privileged to be associated with RC from the days of Dr. Antia, though I have not been able to attend very regularly. Without taking more time, I think we can start the proceedings. If Dr. K.C. Sharma permits, we can go ahead for the presentation. And Dr. Bhabatosh Biswas, a colleague, a very eminent colleague from my fraternity. I'm indeed honored to introduce you. He's a RG Kar Medical College. He's the former Vice Chancellor of West Bengal University of Health Sciences, Vice President of the National Board of Examinations, and President of Indian Association of Cardiothoracic Surgeons. Dr. Bhabatosh is presenting his case of congenital lobar emphysema. Dr. Bhabatosh, please.
Good evening, everybody. And this is a nice platform. Where during COVID period, all of us is meeting. And credit goes to Sukumar and other colleagues here who have made this possible. That even in COVID days we are meeting. This is probably second meeting Sukumar, as I learned. So during discussion last day when Sukumar asked, so I thought, let me present this case. This is Madam is here, Ramta Madam is here, so it will be simpler for me. So this is actually purely thoracic case. But then let me tell you, in rural setting, surgeons are compelled to do everything. Particularly some of the thoracic cases, they are under compulsion. And those people who work in rural setting gradually learn masterly, not only just manage. Basic thoracic surgery, some of the thoracic surgery which must be done in rural setting are life-saving. Many of my surgical colleagues who work in general surgery do work in rural setting, they manage it nicely. So that is very unique thing that prompted me to take this case forward. And this case, I thought, let me present it. It is absolutely thoracic surgery case. But then these problems are faced by general surgeons who work in rural areas. So just let me give just experience of one case. This case, though infrequent, but in the practice of thoracic surgery, we have quite a good number of experience. Just give me a very little background for surgeons who are working in rural setting. Congenital lobar emphysema was first described as early as 1932, but it was redesigned, registered in 1951. It is not very frequent, but it is also not very rare. In every 20,000-30,000 live births, we get one of them. And these cases present very early in life. Very small children, maybe 6 months, 1 year. Sometimes I encountered cases of maybe 4 years and a few more than 5-6 years, but majority of cases in my experience had been within first 1 year of life. So patient present with respiratory distress and recurrent respiratory infection, respiratory distress. These are the presenting symptoms, and this occurs due to progressive hyperinflation of the disease lobe. The disease lobe is quite big. That presses the mediastinum and pushes the other lung also. So gradually, due to this herniation of progressively descending lobe, symptoms start. Patient usually have symptoms of cough on recurrent respiratory infection, sometimes wheeze, not great symptoms. So let me present one case in couple of lines only that will make a brief idea how it is. This is a baby of 6 months old having 4 kg of body weight. She had repeated episode of pneumonia and repeated hospital admission within this 6 months of life. And another associated that seizure disorder and gross shifting of the trachea and diminished breath sound over the right hemithorax, and that was resonant. Sometimes there are associated anomalies of phocomelia that is also sometimes associated. Other things are normal. Other things normal. So just I want to spend 1 minute in this. A baby presenting with recurrent respiratory distress or recurrent chest infection in a rural area where there is no access to reach a big center or a experienced thoracic surgeon. So they come to their physician or pediatrician and finally refer to a surgeon. If such a baby comes having recurrent respiratory infection and recurrent respiratory distress, this is how chest excess looks like. The side, right side, which looks normal X-ray, it is not normal. It is hyperinflated. I have put this X-ray to show that the side which looks like normal translucent, that is not normal, that is hyperlucent. And the next CT will explain this. This is how the CT looks. The entire right lung is hyperinflated lobe, and that has crossed the mediastinum through the anterior area, anterior mediastinum. And the normal lung is compressed like a sheet of thin tissue on the other side. And the baby is surviving and maintaining hemodynamics with that small sheet of lung. And if we remember this pathophysiology, that will make life easier. And if the baby comes with recurrent respiratory infection and recurrent distress, having such chest section CT, and major part is taken by pediatrician physician, if they can diagnose and the patient reaches to a surgeon who are in rural setting, so it is now a challenging situation like a gunshot within the chest. If a gunshot really comes, a surgeon working in rural setting, he has to do it. Similarly, such a baby, if it is possible to send to higher centers, fine, but such facility may not be available around. So such a baby needs surgery. Surgery is not a great surgery. It is once the diagnosis is made and surgeon has got some experience in handling chest, that can manage nicely by rural setting. So anesthesia is simple, but I want to put one line here. While turning position, patient may lose hemodynamic stability because just turning a little bit become more respiratory distress. So competent anesthetist will be able to put an endotracheal tube with usual medication, but give high flow oxygen to maintain the saturation, and surgeon must be very confident that he has to do the job very fast. Once he makes an incision over the chest and lung pips out, whole thing settles. Initially, it is very, very stormy. Once the baby is taken to theater, giving anesthesia, putting an endotracheal tube, absolutely hemodynamics unstable. But once you take table and just make one incision, open the chest, maybe in a minute you can open the chest, and once this is done, in between intercostal space, lung just peeps out. It was waiting inside in high pressure. As soon as incision made from skin to pleura, as soon as you cut it, it peeps out. And once the lung peeps out, patient becomes absolutely hemodynamically stable. So that is the important part. So this is the picture. Let me go back to see it again. So once this is open, lung starts peeping up. As soon as peeps up, so what happens by this time? Remaining lung of this side gets well expanded, mediastinum comes back, and the other side lung start working. So it is a matter of couple of minutes only. If diagnosis is perfect, anesthesis is quite reasonable. You take it to table. As soon as it is open, lung peeps out and it settles. And this is lobe, hyperinflated lobe. So see, compared to whole body size of the baby, it is quite big. This lobe of the lung is bigger probably than the entire hemithorax or even chest. So once it comes, it is absolutely settled. Now let me come to the difficult part. Let me ask the difficult part. how to do lobectomy. I am not going into details, but let me tell you, in my experience, many surgeons having experience in general surgery or pediatric surgery who are working in rural setting, somehow they have managed to learn lobectomy. May not be anatomically perfect dissection or whatever way, in particularly in trauma setting, they become experienced who are working in districts or subdivision in rural setting where there is no help of thoracic surgery. Lobectomy can be managed. So those who have got a reasonable experience of doing lobectomy, they can manage. And let me tell you, for those surgeons who have very limited experience of chest, if such a lobe peeps out, just a small baby, putting a clamp a little carefully, not to put a clamp on the major pulmonary vessels and mass ligation, that also saves the baby. I don't recommend that, but sometimes surgeons are compelled to do that. So what I want to transmit here, that a baby having recurrent chest infection and distress, if it is diagnosed by a pediatrician as congenital lobar emphysema, my suggestion to all young colleagues who are working in rural setting, they can take it safely, and patient will be grossly hemodynamic unstable, but once the chest is open, lung peeps out, and the later part become very easy. And whether you do absolutely classical lobectomy or not doesn't matter. Whatever way you can manage lobectomy, that will save the baby. And rest of the procedure is the same. After doing this, see, this is how big it looks. And then lobectomy is done, put a chest then come out, and the histopathology shows classical picture, and rest of the management very simple, just pain management, and put the chest then for a couple of days and take it out. Normally, in my experience, I have worked sometimes in rural setting. Many of my students and colleagues, they have also worked in rural setting. Putting a chest then is a common thing. Most of the surgeons working in rural setting, they become experienced in that. Thoracotomy, they also learn, because many a times they have to handle chest injuries. So putting these two things together, having a little courage, somebody, if he gets a referral of congenital lobar emphysema of a small baby having recurrent distress, it is possible to manage, and outcome is absolutely fantastic. That will save the life. So once this is done, you see, this was the previous picture on this side, and after surgery, now both lungs are seen. This is the X-ray real picture, but what was seen as transfusion, that was just hyperinflated. So this was the picture pre-op, and this is the post-op picture, and it is absolutely lying, and this is the baby. So this is, though it is uncommon, but many of my rural surgeons, means our surgeons working in rural setting, they will be compelled to handle such cases in their lifetime. That is the prompting I got, that I should present this. Though it may not be very frequent, but many of the surgeons may face this setting. This is what I want to say, and let us have discussion on this. I believe I have finished in time.
Very fine. Very fine. Any question from?
May
Any
I just
question?
have a couple of comments?
Yes, yes.
And we will open. Dr. Bhabatosh has presented a very beautiful case and has highlighted the main features. Only thing is, since we are talking of rural setup and a baby coming in respiratory distress, little differential diagnosis must be kept in mind, because it should not be confused with pneumothorax. Because if somebody confuses it with pneumothorax and inserts a drainage tube to drain the, to get the air out, it can be quite problematic. Second, he also mentioned about anesthesia, and I think that's a very tricky situation, because if you give too much positive pressure, as is the tendency, baby can go into even cardiac arrest, and it is recommended that the surgeon should be washed up and ready to open the chest when the baby is being induced. Besides that, I think he has covered, and any questions, Dr. Bhabatosh will be happy to answer, I'm sure. Thank you.
Let me express my sincere gratitude to Madam Ratna. You have pointed out very, very relevant points. So let me just put one word regarding what you said earlier, that initial differential diagnosis is very, very important, what Madam has just suggested. It may be pneumothorax, it may be congenital lobar emphysema, or it may be bulla. Sometimes mistaken bulla looks like this, and putting a chest drain in a bulla or here might be disaster. So, Madam has very rightly pointed out that one must be absolutely confident and sure to make this differential diagnosis. Thanks, Madam, for this comment. So, any question from anybody?
One question, Dr. Biswas and to ma'am. Is there any other help of any other imaging which can help in a right diagnosis, correct diagnosis? Because in the X-ray, it may not be possible for the common surgeon, general surgeon, or the other surgeon to differentiate between the bulla and the pneumothorax. Any other imaging can it help?
Normally, imaging here, a primary one X-ray, then CT scan. USG doesn't have much role in chest, unless just accepting collection of fluid, that is the only, otherwise X-ray and CT. Here X is classical. You may not be fortunate to have classical X-rays, but let me point out here that these cases will not reach directly to a surgeon working in rural setting. It will first, a baby having recurrent respiratory distress will be seen by pediatrician, and they will examine the X-ray. And for surgeons who are handling it, I suggest them to look at X-ray nicely and CT. Sometimes it may be that you may not get CT. That's a difficult situation to diagnose. So pediatrician handling this, or radiologist taking PA and lateral X-ray, they may be able to give some idea, but CT is diagnostic. So these are the two major imaging modalities, X-ray and CT scan.
And I think if CT is available, it should be done. That will be the cornerstone of the diagnosis. And these days, I'm sure even rural areas have a lot of facilities. It's not that it's not available. And also, I think prenatal diagnosis is also coming up now. And in that also, ultrasound and even MRI is being done to pick up the fetal life itself.
Okay. Sir, what about the role of this thing, 3D ultrasound? Because nowadays it has come, so it may sometimes diagnose if the radiologist is very good.
Yes, you are right. 3D ultrasound is a good option that is coming up slowly. And till now, so gold standard is X-ray and CT, but 3D ultrasound is promising option. If it is available, that may be useful. Yes.
Dr. Dilip Gupta is actually at present the Director Professor of Surgery at Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Medical Sciences, Sevagram, Wardha. He had many publications in the national and international journals, and he is at present the Vice President of our Association of Rural Surgeons of India, and he is at present also the Associate Editor of Indian Journal of Surgery of Association of Surgeons of India. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, and I had the opportunity to be with Dr. Gupta in Medical College, Kolkata as examiner. He worked as examiner in several universities, and we are proud to be a faculty, and he has kept contact with teachers of different parts of the country, particularly the rural areas.
Very fine.
Sir, thank you very much for nice introduction. I know most of you, as you had been coming to rural surgery conferences, and you had been to Sevagram also at our place in
Yes.
2008 when we
The
organized the
first-
conferences.
The first conference.
Yeah. Therefore, 93 also and 2008 also. We organized 2 conferences of ARSI. And I met Dr. Vishwas when I came to Kolkata for examination. He came in the exam hall also.
Yes.
So we met there also. Sir.
You remember, that's great.
Yeah. Now, actually, the case will be presented by Dr. Saurabh Uplenchwar. He is my senior resident, and he is more interested in urology, and cases also pertain to their urology. It is actually isolated inguinal metastasis in cases of seminoma. So I'll request Dr. Saurabh, please share your slide and start the presentation. Dr. Saurabh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you start. Dr. Saurabh is our SR. He was PG from Sevagram only, and now he's SR doing SRship. Passed in 2019.
Good evening, everyone. Today I'm going to present a case on testicular seminoma with isolated inguinal lymph node metastasis. Testicular seminoma is the most common germ cell tumor affecting testes in about 40 to 45% of cases. The testicular lymphatics generally drain along gonadal vessels to the retroperitoneal nodes. Occasionally, there is involvement of iliac and inguinal lymph nodes also because of secondary retrograde fashion because of bulky retroperitoneal metastasis, as well as extension of tumor into the epididymis, breaching of tunica vaginalis, or involvement of the scrotal valve, and extension into the vas deferens. Direct inguinal metastases are also reported due to previous surgical manipulation of inguinoscrotal region and altered lymphatic drainage because of it. Now coming to the case summary, we had a 49 years old male who presented to our department with history of swelling in the left hemiscrotum since 1 year, swelling in the left groin since 6 months, and pain over the left hemiscrotum since 2 months. The patient was apparently all right 1 year back when he experienced a painless swelling in the left hemiscrotum, which was insidious in onset and had gradually increased to the present size. He also experienced a single swelling in the left inguinal region, which was of a size of P to begin with and then has increased to the size of a lemon. The patient, however, started feeling a dragging and dull-aching pain over the left hemiscrotum since the last 2 months. The patient had no history of cough, fever with chills, weight loss, or any other swelling all over the body. He had history of hydrocele surgery on the left side some 24 years back. On examination, the left hemiscrotum appeared to be enlarged, scrotal rugosities were present, and previous operative scar was seen and healthy. The left inguinal mass was approximately of size 6 into 4 centimeter. On palpation, the scrotal skin was free of the underlying structure. The testis was hard and enlarged, non-tender, and had a smooth surface, about 8 into 4 into 4 centimeter in size. Transillumination was negative. The patient also had a single hard left mobile inguinal lymph mass of 6 into 4 centimeter in size. In view of the above examination, we proceeded to the investigations with USG inguinoscrotum, which revealed a heterogeneously eco-textured mass, which was hyperechoic of size 7.6 into 5.4 and 4.1 centimeter, and also showed internal vascularity. The left inguinal mass also was an ill-defined heterogeneously eco-textured mass of size 5.1 into 4.8 into 3 centimeter with internal vascularity and was likely to be metastatic. In view of the above findings, we proceeded with FNAC, which suggested the lymph nodal mass to be a metastasis of seminoma or high-grade non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. In wake of these findings, we tried to rule out seminoma first and then did some tumor markers, which turned out to be LDH 1060 units per liter. AFP and beta HCG were found to be normal. Considering the FNAC and tumor marker finding, we then proceeded with CECT chest and CECT chest and abdopelvis for staging purposes, which also turned out to be normal. For treatment, we did left high inguinal orchidectomy with left inguinal lymph node excision. The final histopathological report of left inguinal orchidectomy turned out to be seminoma with extensive necrosis, and the separately sent left inguinal lymph node turned out to be a metastasis of the seminoma. As we have previously said, the lymphatics accompanying the testicular vessels exit through the inguinal area to the paraaortic nodes, leading typical patterns of spread according to the size of the primary tumor. Involvement of lymph nodes, inguinal nodes can occur in secondary retrograde fashion, usually when there are bulky retroperitoneal nodes. Primary inguinal lymph node involvement is also rare and associated with tumor extension to the epididymis or breaching of the tunica vaginalis or extension to the scrotal wall and vas deferens. Direct inguinal metastases are reported in cases of previous inguinoscrotal surgery. This was also true in our case. The inguinal metastasis in case of seminoma varies from 2 to 10%. Inguinal lymph node metastasis is very common in non-seminomatous germ cell tumors. The routine management of inguinal lymphatics, whether they are palpable or not, in patients with testicular tumors and the previous history of inguinal or scrotal surgery remains controversial as a result of insufficient data. Prophylactic inguinal dissection of inguinal lymph nodes is rarely mentioned in literature. For testicular seminoma, inguinoscrotal radiotherapy is also given. The low incidence of metastasis to inguinal lymph nodes, morbidity following ilioinguinal radical dissection, and the availability of highly successful multimodality therapy makes management an alternative. In our case, where only one inguinal lymph node showed metastasis. The patient was started on chemotherapy and radiotherapy to further reduce recurrence. Thus concluding the topic, as it was evident from the above discussion, we should suspect testicular malignancy with inguinal lymph node metastasis in every case of inguinoscrotal surgery, though these cases are a rarity. Thank you.
Very fine. Very well presented. Well presented.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment because inguinal lymph nodes are very, very rare in these cases. What happens is in our area, we have a very high incidence of filariasis. And what we find is chronic orchitis with lymphadenopathy, inguinal lymphadenopathy, is very, very common in our area. What we thought that it could be a chronic orchitis, what was very common pertaining to this area because we see such cases and small lymph nodes. But here what happened is there was a mass with 6 centimeter mass of single inguinal lymph nodes. That's why we suspected that it could be filaria. But FNAC showed it could be metastatic from seminoma or lymphoma. We also had a series of cases of paratesticular tumor lymphomas, paratesticular swellings, which turned out to be lymphoma, adenocarcinoma, like that. We have a case of 6 cases of paratesticular tumors, which were actually non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So we considered that only, but then it turned out to be seminoma. And this surgery, what was done was 20 years back. We never thought that this could be the cause of metastasis. And less than 2% is a very, very much rarity. That's why we presented this case. We thought we will present this case in the in this clinic.
Very fine. The idea is that this diagnosis should be kept at the back of your mind when you are examining such a patient.
Yeah, now because we have such case, we will keep this in mind also, like
Yes,
that. So
that's
FNAC nowadays available everywhere. We must
Yes.
keep in mind to do at least FNAC.
quite
in such cases.
perfectly.
Gupta, in this particular patient, there was no metastasis in the abdominal lymph nodes by CT
No, no,
scan.
no, no. Isolated inguinal only, single lymph node of inguinal area. No other metastasis. CTs were showed. You could see the CT chest and CT abdomen, but no, it was normal, absolutely normal. Even no other inguinal lymph nodes were there on the ultrasound also. Single lymph node was there.
As Saurav has mentioned, it is very common in the non-seminomatous cases of inguinal metastasis. Really
Right.
true in 2 pediatric surgery in children, we have found embryonal carcinoma, which is
Right.
mimicking the
Right.
teratoma. There we found the metastasis in the inguinal lymph node without any metastasis in the abdominal lymph nodes.
Definitely.
That is a non-seminomatous patient, and Saurav has already mentioned.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful patient.
Any other question from? Any other question? So thank you, young man, presented very well. We congratulate you for this good presentation. And next,
Thank you, sir.
next now. Our more prominent Dr. Sagar Javle, we welcome him. And
Dr. Sharma, you please introduce Dr. Sagar Javle. I'm just talking.
Dr. Sagar Javle, you
Dr.
see,
Sharma is
not
a great innovator, and Dr. Sagar Javle is also another great innovator. Please introduce.
he is not only known in this country but all over the world know, a pediatric surgeon turned into a scientist. Or rather, everybody is a scientist. He has more than 100 inventions done till date and 40 patents registered in Mumbai office. He has developed 15 new operations and 30 new therapies in medicine which are under trial. His inventions 50 times cheaper than the other presentations are availability, and the great boon to the nation and the mankind. We feel proud of him. Please go ahead, Dr. Jalve, with your presentation.
Shall I present? Good evening, everybody. I am Dr. Sagar Javle from Jalgaon, Maharashtra. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Today's topic is the role of non-invasive vagal stimulation therapy for paralytic ileus in children. This is my new hospital, which recently I shifted just 1 week ago with the blessings of all of you. The slides are not. 1 minute. Okay. In the introduction, as we all know, the post-operative paralytic ileus is very common in children with a lot of morbidity and occasionally even mortality. And the therapy, this particular therapy stimulates the vagus nerve in the neck non-invasively, and it increases intestinal motility to treat paralytic ileus. As we know that the vagus is secretomotor to the bowel, but this particular topic or issue was never taken into consideration by the mainstream and the scientific community. And this therapy and its device are reported for the first time in the medical literature, particularly for this indication. Non-invasive stimulation of the vagus is already FDA approved for something like epilepsy. But somehow the secretomotor role of vagus, such an important role, was overlooked by the scientific community. So I started doing clinical trials for paralytic ileus and constipation and got great results with it. Aims and objective of the study is to, as I already said, is to find out the role of this therapy in post-operative paralytic ileus in children. Although I expect the same results in adults, but since I am a pediatric surgeon, most of the cases are children. And it is to develop a safe, cheap, effective device for non-invasive vagal stimulation so that other surgeons should also get the benefit of it. In the materials and methods, in last 3 years in my institute, I used the therapy on 26 patients on post-operative paralytic ileus in various conditions such as Hirschsprung disease, anorectal malformations, final stage, perforative peritonitis, and many others. Due to the time, I cannot enumerate all of them. And 36 patients in the same period with a similar disease condition with significantly longer paralytic ileus, more than 72 hours, were kept as a control group. Dynamic intestinal obstruction was ruled out clinically and by investigations. It's a common sense that if you stimulate the vagus in dynamic obstruction, there could be perforation. So it's for a dynamic obstruction. All patients in the therapy group were given a fair trial of conservative treatment before subjecting to the therapy. So all patients were not directly subjected. Only those who are more than 72 hours paralytic ileus not responding to the therapy, only they are subjected. So that is an ethical issue. And the device used in the therapy produces electrical impulses of 50 hertz, means 50 cycles per second, and 1 ampere current with a voltage of 12 volts. One terminal of the device is placed on the left vagus and another as a control on the shoulder or on the corresponding chest or abdomen. The closer you put it to the vagus, the more current flows. The away you put it, less current flows. The left vagus nerve in the neck is used for stimulation as it is far less. It has far less fibers to the heart than the right vagus nerve, and so that you should not have cardiac side effects. You know, that is a dictum even in non-invasive stimulation for other indications. It's the left vagus which is stimulated always in this therapy, and the duration of therapy was 4 hours. Now this is new. The others do in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but since we want sustained stimulation, in my series it was 4 hours. This is the device I developed for non-invasive vagal stimulation therapy. There is a step-down transformer that steps down mains into 12 volts DC, 12 volts AC current, alternating current of 50 cycles per second. And these are the 2 electrodes, disposable electrodes, and the caps which fit over that. The disposable electrodes are to be thrown out. And this picture shows that the vagus is very superficial in the neck, just below the angle of the mandible. And otherwise, other places, vagus is quite deep and not available for modulation. It's a God's gift, I would say, that vagus being so superficial at the just below the angle of the mandible, over the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. That is the place where the main electrode is to be put. Now this is the exact photograph and location. You can see the child has paralytic ileus with distension. On the left vagus, I have put 1 electrode, another on the corresponding chest. It can be put on the corresponding shoulder, but more current will flow. And if you put it away, less current flows. So in children, we generally put on the left chest. The results were all patients responded to the therapy. That is really great. No patient had any side effects. The therapy group had an average recovery period of 28.6 hours only, compared to 168.7 hours for the control group. And the difference came as statistically very significant. Now here I have calculated the statistical significance also, because clinically things can appear deceptive. The morbidity in therapy group was far less than the control group. In the discussion, I would say that vagus is secretomotor to the intestines, hence stimulation leads to increased intestinal motility, a fact overlooked by the scientific community, and no therapy designed over that, unfortunately. The device stimulates left vagus nerve in the neck just below the angle of the mandible through disposable ECG electrodes, which reduce the skin resistance from 1 lakh ohm to 100 ohms. Now this point is of critical importance because skin has 100,000 means 1 lakh ohm resistance, and no current is going to flow through the skin. So what idea I did is put the ECG electrodes and the silver chloride in the ECG electrode. They reduce the resistance from 1 lakh ohm to just 100 ohms, and 100 ohms becomes close to copper. It means it's as conductive as copper now with this particular trick. Now the device which is FDA approved by the US, by the American government, does not do this trick. So you can understand that what kind of a device they have made and what permission they have given and what is their level of science. See, this is the difference. They just put 2 metal electrodes over the neck and not bothering to lower the skin resistance. So it means no electricity is flowing through that. And we take US FDA as a absolute, what we say, Bible. It's not true by any chance. This is a bright example where science being overlooked in giving FDA approval to such devices. Prolonged paralytic ILS leads to a lot of morbidities such as electrolyte imbalance, respiratory distress, longer hospital stay, longer RT duration, abdominal distension, and stasis leads to infection. Prolonged ILS reduces the surgeon's confidence. Now this is very important and puts him in a dilemma whether to conserve or to reoperate unnecessarily, because the relatives also get very anxious. And then although you know that you have just done a surgery 3-4 days ago, but there is a distension which is growing, not responding. Has something gone wrong? And nothing has gone wrong actually. It's the bowel which is slipping. And it's a tricky and anxious situation unnecessarily. It also makes the patient relatively anxious, as I said, and the device, about the safety, the device uses 12 volts DC current, and actual current flowing through the body is just 0.5 milliampere, which is 10 times less than the FDA approved limit of electricity on the human body. FDA has approved 5 milliampere current actually passing through the body. This is 0.5 milliampere. So this is really safe and no ethical issues can be raised on that. The device has been commercialized at a very negligible cost of rupees 10,000 only. Now this is very important to give it to others also, not just to keep it to yourself. In the conclusion, I would say that the therapy group had significantly faster recovery and far less morbidity compared to control group. Non-invasive vagal stimulation therapy and its device are cheap, effective, and safe treatment options in paralytic ILS in children, which is reported for the first time in the medical literature. Thank you very much.
Very fine, excellent. I will only say in this one word that you see in old days they put your janau jo gale mein hum pehante hain, this was being taught as that it should be put behind the right ear, just behind the right ear, and the vagal auricular branch of vagus is also here. And once it stimulates, you can pass stools comfortably and pass urine also comfortably. This is what from time immemorial this is taught, that this thread is to be, while going to bathroom, whenever you go, you tie this, you put this thread.
Yes, sir, but the thread does not pass any electricity through that. So it's just more of a gimmick than anything.
Perfectly true. Perfectly true. What I mean to say, even during those days also, they knew that there is something here. Now we call it auricular branch of vagus.
If you massage it,
Yes.
that will make some sense.
Yes.
Although nothing close to proper electrical
That
stimulation.
is true. That is true. There is no comparison between your
Not just a
device.
thread, but you can at least massage.
Yes. So I am
Massage
telling
is
you
all.
that this was known to the ancestors also, and how it is being done, it was advised to do it. That's all.
Okay.
Yes.
Sir, I would like to see whether it was used in paralytic ileus of some other causes like septicemia,
Yes,
dysarthrolytemia.
I said perforative peritonitis. I had 7 patients.
No,
There is a
simple-
perforative peritonitis.
not surgical cases, non-surgical paralytic ileus. Non-surgical, medical that is called.
Well, it can be used, but then since I am a surgeon, such patients don't come to me.
Okay.
So if we extend the
think-
trial to other areas, then it will happen.
Yeah. I think we can give it like patient they come for dysarthrolemia paralytic ileus, unnecessary surgery being done, negative laparotomies. So
Yes.
these will be avoided if your device is used in those cases also.
Certainly.
Probably.
That's fine. Very good. Any other question from or suggestion from any side? So, thank you, Dr. Javale.
Thank you very much, sir.
Very fine. First class presentation and congratulations for this new device.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So, our next speaker is Dr. Ravindra Vora, 45 T. So, now we'll be taking tea also simultaneously. Welcome to Dr. Ravindra Vora. He is a pediatric surgeon from Sangli and Charitable Trust, Sushruta Charitable Trust, Pediatric Surgery Center, PG Institute, Sangli. Again, an excellent rural surgeon of par excellence. So I welcome him to present his tea for us.
I'm happy that there are two great inventors present in today's meeting, Dr. K.C. Sharma and Sagar Zawade. So I feel little very small in front of these two inventors. As you all know, that Indian women lack dietary intake of folic acid and B12 vitamins. And therefore, they have a large incidence of anemia. And if this anemia is present or the deficiency of these two vitamins is present in preconceptional period, there is a likelihood of fetus developing neural tube defect, which presents as either spina bifida, hydrocephalus, or anencephaly, or there are several defects in this spectrum. So this was proved back in late 90s, that the etiological factor, one of the major etiological factor, is folic acid deficiency in preconceptional period. And therefore, later on, by 2003 or 4, the American and European countries accepted the advice of Jeffrey Oakland that we should fortify wheat flour with folic acid. And that was accepted, as we have done fortification of our common salt with iodine all over India. They did this in all their countries. Is it logistic in India? No. That's why we are lagging behind by nearly 16, 17 years and allowing a very high incidence of neural tube defects in India. It's nearly at which present size of our population of more than 130 130 crore, it comes to about 1,10,000 babies born with neural tube defect per year. And that also adds to infant mortality rate because nearly 10,000 of these babies die every year. And those who survive have a very bad life, suffering because many surgeries also fail to correct their deformities, their incontinence to urine stool, their paralysis in the lower limbs. Of course, this doesn't happen in all children because it's a wide spectrum of defects with wide symptoms and signs of presentation. Even then, the families suffer. Our healthcare system of the nation spends a lot of money on this. So what is the answer for this? So in 2018, we had an international conference in Delhi on spina bifida hydrocephalus. And there, myself and Professor Ashok Antony of Indiana University, we sat together. He is an NRI. He moved to America about 32 years ago. And he is a hematologist and a great researcher in vitamins. So this was naturally to his mind that we must do something for Indian children. So we thought of, because, we don't eat only wheat. We eat bajri, jawar, nachni, rice, and wheat. So which cereal you can fortify? And secondly, is it possible to fortify these cereal flours for whole of country? No. And moreover, we don't buy flour from the shop. We buy grains, we get them turned into flour in nearby mill, very small scale mill, and we eat for maybe 1 week, maybe 1 month, but all families, especially our country has a large population, more than 65% population living in the villages. So it's not possible to do this sort of preventive job. So we chose a very common beverage like tea. And we thought, why not fortify tea with vitamin folic acid and B12. Now you will ask me why you are adding B12 in India, because it has been shown about 5 to 7 years ago by several surveys that in India, folic acid deficiency alone is not the cause. It's also B12 deficiency. So if we have to correct these, prevent these etiological factors, we have to fortify any food product with these two vitamins or give them tablets. But as you know, no young girls or young women or going to get married or married will consume tablets. So there is a preference for having anything through food. So then Indiana University, Professor Ashok Antony tested all whether the tea is an ideal vehicle, because these vitamins have to be water soluble, they have to be heat stable, they should change the color, smell or taste of tea, and it should be available easily all over India. As you know, we buy tea from the market. So there is no question of doing it yourself. It always comes prepared with different flavors. As you know, there is tulsi cha, there is ginger cha. So why not have vitamin chai? So we are proposing that. So to prove this thing, we took a trial on young women of nursing and homeopathy college who used to attend in one campus and used to have tea in one canteen, where we could supervise and give them in different thermos flasks according to our controlled blind trials. So, but we had to decide what is the correct dose of these two vitamins. As you know, the vitamin tablets of folic acid are available with 5 milligram, which we have been promoting for preconceptional correction of this deficiency. B12 comes in different forms from 0.1 milligram to 1 milligram, 1.5 milligram. So, which is the correct thing to correct their deficiency of these two vitamins? And another thing is, in India, nearly 60 to 80% of women are having anemia. It may be mild to moderate to severe anemia. So in addition to iron deficiency, they are also having dietary deficiency of these two vitamins. So providing these two vitamins to all women of reproductive age will correct their anemia as well as prevent neural tube defects in the fetus. So we divided these girls into 3 groups. One was the control group, and another 2 groups were given 2 types of doses. See, but all this was done for ease of administration, ease of correctness of delivery of the dose. We use tea bags. I know the tea bags are not used all over. Even in our house, we don't use tea bags. We use tea powder. So ultimately, we have to prove that tea powder fortification is also equally effective and useful and affordably available all over India. So that will be our next step. But we had to first prove that this tea fortification will be beneficial. So for one small group, we decided to fortify it with 0.1 and 0.1 milligram of B12 and 1 milligram of folic acid. Second group, we chose 0.5 milligram of B12 and 1 milligram of folic acid. And then we gave them a daily cup of tea for 2 months. Of course, we had done pre-trial testing of blood levels of folic acid, B12, hemoglobin, and peripheral smear to assess the type of anemia, level of hemoglobin, and level of these two vitamins in their serum. And at the end of trial, we again repeated these investigations, and to our, I would say, to our joy, that we found that it had definitely increased these two vitamin levels in the group under experimental. So it was very significant, biostatistically also significant, and at the same time their hemoglobin also rose to considerable level. So we thought this was a good thing. And as a preliminary study, I know this is not a randomized controlled trial as it should be. And also it was not a trial on tea, loose tea, either mamra or a mixture or just powder. So that will come later on. But we decided that let this be known to all people in all states. So they, and also in other Asian countries and African countries. So they, on their own, they will do further research, do further controlled trials. We have also now planned 3 more trials for this, and now we have decided to give them 1 milligram of folic acid and 1 milligram of B12 in 2 grams of tea powder or 2 gram sachet of tea bag, 2 gram tea bag, and give them for 3 months. And then we assess what is the efficacy of this fortified tea on correction of their anemia, as well as the levels of these 2 vitamins and hemoglobin. So that there were 3 trials we have planned. One trial will be only with tea bags. Another trial will on 50 girls will be on with loose powder or loose tea, and third will be in the villages, 50 women of villages who would do this tea at their home, but they are educated and they will understand how it is to be done and how it's not to be done. Not to be done in the sense it should not be mixed with other family members' tea, or it should not be boiled too much. Just one boil, and you take down the pot from the Bershen or gas. And the trials, these 2 is blind control trial, and Mr. Sharma is giving me signal that you please complete your lecture. Am I right, Sharma?
Yes.
So this is all, and it has been published in June, last week of June, in British Medical Journals, Nutrition, Prevention, Health magazine. And not only that, because of its original research and its importance all over the world, they publish, through their press, they have publicized through 5,000 news outlets in the world. So that much importance they have given. Now we are going also parallel trial in Assam at Dibrugarh with our colleague, Dr. Hemanto Datta. And today only I have asked Lalita Regi whether she would take such a trial on tribal women of her hill station. We are also proposing similar trial on the tribals of Gadchiroli district, where I go for surgery for last 16 years. So I have rapport with that team there, and we could do that. And this will also be followed by a survey of 75,000 population, which will comprise of nearly 15 to 17,000 families to see the prevalence of neural tube defect in that family, in those families over a period of 1 year. So that will also be done so that in that group, eligible eligible married women may be given such fortified tea as a part of our research. Thank you very much. I welcome any questions on this, and I also invite all of you, if you would like to do these trials in your region, in your area, on your nearby population, we'll be glad to give you all the details of fortification, which vitamin is to be used, which water is to be used, how it is to be sprayed, how it is to be inoculated in the tea bags, etc. So we invite you all to carry out these things. Thank you.
Very good.
May I, Dr. Sharma, please, may I just have a query?
Please.
I was wondering, Dr. Gora talked about, it is nice, one of the method perhaps to fortification, but then I wonder how much it will be feasible in a large scale measure, number one. Number two, in every village, we are talking of the rural women. I understand they are ignorant about the benefit of folic acid and vitamin B12, pre-conception period. Even the doctors also, they don't take folic acid before conception. Some of the gynecologists also. It is really sad part. But what I wonder is this, in every rural area, there are plenty of green leafy vegetables available. And that is a very good source of folic acids, easily available, and they can use one of those products in their add to their dish rather than fortifying this, because it is also quite cumbersome. As an experimental basis, it is all right, but otherwise I don't know how much it will be feasible. So that is one question I would like to ask from Dr. Vora.
See, before we launch this trial, we also visited a tea factory in our town. There are 2 or 3 factories here. We have this blending barrel and all that. So we found out from these people who do this blending in the tea factory, and they are very big, well-known tea brands. And they also suggested that this can be done in our factory. Similarly, it can be done anywhere India, and we are now in conversation and discussion with the Tea Board of India and Tea Session in Assam, so that this can be done on mass scale. It's not a difficult thing. And
difficult job.
Vegetables, see, even in countries like Europe and America, where diet is good, they are deficient because it is difficult to supply more necessary folic acid to your diet. That's why they have to fortify wheat flour.
Dr. Vora, I understand. In European country, abroad, number one, population is less, people are more educated, they can afford the high cost of this, because once we fortify it, even I am sure the tea companies will increase the price list. So should we not try to find out something which is much cheaper and advise the patient accordingly? Already in many of the primary health center, I have seen, they advertise folic acid as the magic bullet or the magic tablet and advise patients to take it, and because it is cheap as well. At the most, it will cost, say, 1 rupee at the most. So that is one thing. But then it is certainly a good alternative. And if it can be done in a mass scale, but then again, we have to understand that many women also, they don't take tea. Even in our center, most of the populations are rural people. Post-operatively, when I ask them to take tea, they say, Dr. Saab, we don't take tea. They don't mind taking, coconut water. That is something very funny. So they will not, many of the patients, they say, I don't take tea, particularly patients from Haryana. They said, instead of that, I take milk. If you allow me to take milk, I will take that. So some of the problems are there, but nevertheless, it is a very good alternative suggestions. If it can be done, implemented.
Hello, sir. I have a question to Dr. Vora. Sir, the basic problem is absorption. So how are you going to solve the problem of absorption? It is not a problem of availability of vitamin B12. It is the absorption. That's why vitamin B12 is given as injections. So those people who have deficiency, they have problem with the absorption. So it's not, oral intake is not going to solve the problem.
But we have seen in this trial and in further trials also, we check that the pre-trial levels and post-trial levels, they definitely show improvement, statistically proven in this thing, about 80% increase in the levels of these vitamins. So absorption is not the only problem. It is deficiency in our diet is also the main problem, which can be solved by giving tea. And another question raised by Dr. Basu was about the cost. That what we are going to suggest to Tea Board of India through the Government of India Health Department, that because these 2 vitamins are not costly, that is one. and whatever cost that will be higher than the normal tea can be compensated by putting in funds from their CSR. All these companies have to shell out CSR every year. That is companies' social responsibility fund. So that can be put into this type of vitamin T, and that will reduce the cost and not exceed too much than other, because there are so many brands which are very costly. Still people buy that. And although we have to see that this is affordable by village women, so we'll see that how it can be kept at a lowest price. Thank you.
May I request that if there are more questions, please place them in the chat box. Dr. Vora will try to answer them in the chat box, through the chat box. So I request our chairperson to proceed.
I congratulate Dr. Vora for presenting, giving us so sweet and lovely tea. Thank you very much, Dr. Vora.
Thank you, sir.
Now Sharma will say, eat his summer season apples to provide iron.
Yes. So that's very fine. Excellent. It will reach every house.
So
And we hope that
iron and folic acid will reach to every house.
the ladies will be benefited in addition to apple in each house, which they will put. They have already started putting every one house. Thank you very much once again. And now I request Dr. Ratna Magotra ji for the next case.
Instead, Dr. Sogoto will probably speak. Dr. Thorat, will you speak now or you after Dr. Sogoto, as you have requested? Dr. Sogoto.
Sir, Dr. Rahul here. Dr. Thorat sir given me message. He had some unavoidable emergency.
Okay.
Right now he is sitting with some government authorities, so he couldn't make it. So next month he will present.
Oh, Dr. Sogoto, please.
That's all right.
Thank you.
So now, who will be presenting next, sir?
Dr. Sogoto Rai.
Sir, am I audible, sir? Hello?
Yes.
Very much.
Yes, you are.
Dr.
Class.
Shall I introduce Ratna ma'am, Dr. Sogoto? Or you will introduce Ratna ma'am?
Yeah, I will do that.
Okay. Yes.
Dr. Sogoto Rai is a pediatric surgeon. We have got lots of pediatric surgeons today in the meeting. I lost the slide, please. Lost the screen.
Sir?
I lost the screen. I think you can go ahead. Yeah. He's Associate Professor, Department of General Surgery at Midnapur Medical College and Hospital. Dr. Sogoto Rai, please present your paper.
Hello, the slides are visible, sir? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, sir, visible.
Nicely visible.
Sir, it is a presentation from the Department of Surgery, Midnapur Medical College and Hospital. It is a case of exomphalus major, how we treat in rural areas. Now, we have to understand what is exomphalus major. Exomphalus major, generally the defect is more than 5 centimeter and the content is liver. And the principles of non-operative treatment are, we have to prevent the rupture of the sac and to prevent infection in this patient. These are the very two important points. During the dressing, we will see how the rupture of the sac is to be prevented, and to prevent infection, we have to give oral antibiotics as well as parenteral antibiotics. Now, what are the indications of the non-operative treatment? The indications are giant exomphalus in a premature baby, because they cannot withstand large operations, associated life-threatening anomalies like tracheoesophageal atresia, that the atresia can be treated surgically, and the exomphalus part is to be managed conservatively. And in the tertiary facilities are not available, like Midnapur Medical College, where a proper pediatric surgery setup is not yet available. So this is a rare case that I want to present. What happened is that this is the photo at the time of birth. You can see the intact sac in that area, and you can see the baby where there is intact sac. This is at the time of birth. The mother has come to us. Now, how we do the dressing, this part is very important because we are doing a conservative treatment. That this part is very important. We have to first wash the area with normal saline. Then we apply povidone iodine. Then we apply 1% mercurochrome. Both these things will help in epithelialization of the tissue. Then we use an antibiotic gel and we give a Gelonet or a Sofratuli over that area and give some gauze and give a paper micropore. Over that we give cotton, and then over that we have a roller bandage, just like this. So this is very important, and this dressing has to be changed generally by 4 to 7 days if there is no soakage. And by 4 to 7 days, the dressing has to be changed. But what is very important, this dressing has to be changed by the surgeon himself, specifically the inner dressing, because during the time of taking away the dressing, there is chances of the rupture of the sac. Now you see how the baby is progressing. How the baby is progressing at 2 weeks of age. There is formation of epithelial tissues, and that is forming. Now you can see from the margin what is happening is that the skin is growing and the defect is being slowly closed. This is at 1 month of age. This is the baby at 2 months of age. The skin margins are coming, the defect is closed. You can see by 2 months of age, the skin has almost healed and there is a slight defect at the center. And by 3 months, the cicatric tissue is completely formed, and you see that the baby is, you cannot see any now the gut content. This is the picture of the baby at 1 year of age. We can see an umbilical defect, and this umbilical defect and on cough or crying, there is impulse over this umbilical area. So there is a hernia over this area. And now what is very important is that at 3 years of age also, there is a scar and puckering over the umbilical area, and there is an impulse on cough. That is important. Now, at this 1 to 2 years of age, generally the repair of hernia has been done in most of the literature and most of the studies, either by a double breasting operation or application of a Prolene mesh. But what is very interesting in this patient, as we followed up this patient over a prolonged period of time, by the age of 12 years, this photo is very recent, 2/7/2021. There, we can see this boy, he has grown up, he is 12 years old. There is a scar over the umbilical area. The umbilicus is white, but very interestingly, there is no impulse on coughing over the umbilicus. So the hernia is healed. So the hernia operation is not required in this patient. This is the take-home message. What I want to say is that if we can follow up in the long term, some patients don't require any operation because these operations are very challenging. This hernia repair are very challenging. So they can heal by itself. But what are the contraindications that we have to keep in mind? Contraindications are there can be rupture of the exomphalus sac when we are dealing with the dressing, specifically during the taking away of the dressing. There can be rupture. If there is rupture, we have to discontinue the conservative treatment. And if there is any associated intra-abdominal problem, whatever be it, like obstruction or malrotation or whatever be it, we have to go for an operation. And that's a must. So the conclusion is that the non-operative treatment for exomphalus is preferred if there is no associated abdominal surgical emergencies. It avoids the hazard and complications encountered with major operations in a vulnerable newborn. But what is the take-home message is that all cases of ventral hernia in a patient treated conservatively do not require operation. Some cases of ventral hernia close by itself on long-term follow-up. So that is very important that I want to say. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sougatarai. It was a very fascinating case for me, and because I haven't seen this for a long time. I just one observation that patient, as the child is growing up, and the family, I think both have to be very, very patient, because sometimes they can get restless and may want or ask for surgery. So any comment on that?
Madam, I
What
have
is that?
I have one way of
I
management of
felt
such
that,
case. Can I, madam?
please.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Well,
Yes,
I
okay.
have managed one of such case of exemplars major. What I did was this case was having actually, we could not close the abdomen. So what I did was I took a Euro bag and then I took cut it from in the mid of the corner triangle, and then I made a continuation stitch on the abdominal wound, and then after I then just left it as such, maintained the patient in nursery, and after every 3 or 4 days I used to twist the bag. Then after 39 days, whole of the thing has gone into the abdomen. Then I closed the abdomen. The girl is still there, and she now 18 years old. I operated this case 18 years back that time. So I could use without offside bag or such things available. I could use only the Euro bag and just went on twisting every third day. So that yeah.
That is also an option. That is an option. When we in NRS Medical College in the pediatric surgery department, the Euro bag was very often used as a silo. But in our case, we didn't use any Euro bag. We just be very careful with the dressing. That is very important. And we allowed the epithelialization tissue to form by using povidone iodine and mercurochrome. That is very important. As we applied those two things, the epithelialization tissue was formed very quickly.
May I comment? As Dr. Gupta has said, and we have to follow that procedure of using a bag or a mesh sometimes if there is rupture of the membrane. Otherwise, if there is no rupture, if we find the membrane is intact, our motto is to keep the membrane intact and at the same time to make the membrane more thickening. So with the regular dressing, the membrane will be more thickened and the chance of infection from outside in will be less. But once the margin of the sac is traumatized by the operation, by introducing or attaching a mesh or a bag, that can cause more chance of introduction of infection. So for that reason, we have tried about 17 cases with this procedure and got the excellent result. And the question, Madam's question was there. What was the question?
My question was
Sogato, please answer Madam's question.
As the child is growing up, they become very conscious of that hernia and the scar. So both the family, the parents and the child have to be very patient. So I just wanted to know how you handle that situation.
Actually, for the initial 2 to 3 weeks, generally we keep the patient in our hospital setup.
It will not matter in the initial 6 months also, 1 year also. After that,
proper counseling, regular follow-up in the outdoor. That is very important. And home care, we have to take the phone number of the patient and give him a personal call every weekly that how is the baby progressing. And you just come over to our OPD whenever necessary. And that is very important. And asking the patient to that is the rapport with the most of the patient sometimes get lost in by the follow-up. Rapport is very important with the patient party. That is important. You have to proper counseling, having proper phone number, and proper two-way communication. That's important.
Sorry,
and what's important?
Absolutely.
In the phone, we used to ask few questions, whether the baby is having any rise of temperature or not, if there is any vomiting by the baby, or if the anorexia, whether the baby is developing any loss of appetite, whether his or her appetite is good, because we want to see whether there is any signs of infection developing or not by those questions.
Thank you very much.
Fine. The gist of the thing is that follow-up is important. Close follow-up is important. That's important.
So in the meantime, Dr. Thorat is not presenting, as he is not presenting the case. I request all the participants, please make your video portion on so that we can take the photographs of the participant for our record, and then it will be helpful. I request all the participants, if possible, to make the video on for the photography. And also I request if any participant today has any proposal to present any case in the next meeting of 22nd August, please propose and I will make a note of it so that that can be placed. And after Dr. K.C. Sharma concluded with his and Dr. Ratna Madam concluded this session of the presentation, I will request Dr. Rajesh Tongauta, our Secretary of the Association of the Rural Surgeons of India, to give the vote of thanks. Professor Sharma and Dr. Ratna Madam, please continue with your session as the chairpersons.
I will say just a few words that an excellent session with excellent new information and excellent for the rural people as well as for urban both. And these sessions should continue and we'll learn. And then a publication of all which is being presented. In rural surgery, all should be presented in rural surgery. That's so that rural surgery reaches everybody and we can read and evaluate our things and comments and all those things. Thank you very much once again.
So may I have a question? May
Yes.
I ask you?
Yes.
Me, Parthasarathi Giri from Holdia IIM. Sir,
Yeah.
what is actually the topic, the rural surgery or the surgery in a rural condition? And what is the...
Yes, perfectly true.
Yes.
That is perfectly true.
All the things are going
Yes.
on with the best modalities. So
Very
every
correct.
rural area do not provide such modalities, even in the Holdia.
Yes,
Sir
yes.
knows my HOD, Professor Maiti, he knows it. But the surgery, what we do in a condition that is very, in one word, bad. But still we do that. So the surgery in a rural condition means rural surgery, or the surgery, modern surgery in a rural setup with some compromise.
Perfectly true, because rural, that is why we call it rural. Surgery is same, whether you do in all institute
Yes, sir.
or anywhere, surgery is same. This is
Sir.
true. But the amount of facilities which are needed, which are there is a lot of difference between what is available in the big institutes and the rural area. So there the responsibility and your technical skill matters more than what you are, because there are people who come to your rescue in big cities, in big
Yes.
hospital, big institution. But here there is nobody to come to your rescue when you are in trouble. So you have to do everything yourself.
Yes,
And
sir.
right from
That's
anesthesia downwards, we have been doing, as you know, we have been doing all these
That
5
is
in
the
1
true
with.
sense of the term, what we do there.
Yes.
I
So
think we can add that there is a work which is performed with low resources,
yes,
with lack of
Uh,
resources.
What are
and
the
we do it in
parameters of
our
low
area.
resources, sir?
Yeah, lack of resources. There are no
Yes,
resources
sir.
there.
You have seen the low resources. What
Yeah.
are the parameters that includes the low resources?
We say that
This
CT
is the
scan is
legal
not
part.
available.
Every
CT not
surgery is a
available.
legal one.
no,
No,
I just
CT is
one
not
word.
available. We have to sometimes believe on our clinical sense. CT not available, ultrasound is not available, most of the places. Although now it is there. Earlier it was not.
Manpower is low.
Yeah,
Modalities is low.
Yes.
And the instruments are still, we have to compromise everywhere.
But if
in
we
the
go,
rural
if you
areas.
say that legality, we have to say life saving is what we
Life
can
saving
do it
is only
everywhere.
one thing that we can
Yes.
do it.
Definitely.
Yes,
Definitely.
yes.
I give you one small example that in just 4 years back in flood conditions, I did 5 in 1. I was a single man doing as a surgeon myself, gynecologist myself, conducting delivery and retained placenta, anesthetist myself, ultrasonologist myself, and pediatrician myself. All the 5 we did. I operated 13 cases there
Sir,
and saved all
that
the lives.
we also do,
Yes.
we did in time, but
Yes.
not nowadays. Nobody will accept it.
No, this is
I think
nowadays.
so.
It's just these days only I have done it.
All in one.
Yes.
Dr. Sharma, you are 5 in 1. AC Sharma is King Sharma.
But I did ask the authorities if somebody would have died, what would have been your reaction? They said we would have handed you over to
That is
police.
an exception you are. But all the person is not capable of doing all the things in a single hand.
So I put one line
Thank
only.
you, sir. Okay, sir.
Last comment by
Yes.
Dr. Sharma, and then
Just
Dr.
one,
Ratna.
one
Yes.
line, just one comment.
I accept.
should we allow the patient to die under rules, or he should survive without rules?
Yes, life saving is first.
So there you are.
Yes.
That is what I did there and told
I
the
agree.
authorities also.
Yes. That
Thank you.
rural life and urban life is the same. There is no difference between them.
We are extremely grateful,
Okay, sir.
Ratna ma'am and Dr. K.C. Sharma to chair today's session. Really, it was a wonderful session, and the stalwarts participated in this session. Really, as Dr. Partho Giri from Haldia said, that is it rural surgery? Truly speaking, in the rural areas, you are getting the services of the surgeons who are working in the rural areas, as well as the surgeons who are working particularly in the urban areas, metropolis areas. They are giving good service. We know who are attached to the Association of Rural Surgeons of India. We know many of the surgeons who are mainly attached to the great institute, teaching institute in the metropolis. They are giving sometimes much of their time to give services to the rural areas, to surgeries in the rural areas. Lot of thanks and gratitude to all of them, like Ratna ma'am, like your Dr. Prabhu from Dr. Manohar Shah from Mumbai. They are going to rural areas, and some surgeons are settled in the rural areas, leaving their works or leaving their attachment from the urban areas. Now, thank you again, Ratna ma'am and Dr. Sharma, and all the participants who have joined in this session, and also the presenter, 5 presenters who presented, and we missed the presentation by Dr. Thorat and by Dr. Rakesh Gautam from Kulu. And now let me request Dr. Rajesh Dungavkar, our Secretary of the Association of Rural Surgeons of India, to give vote of thanks.
I thank all the participants on behalf of ARSI and welcome for the next meeting. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Next meeting will be on 22nd August.
22nd August. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all the participants. Thank you all the speaker. Thank you the chairperson, Dr. K.C. Sharma, Madam Ratna Magotra. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Good night,
So
everybody.
I wanted
Good
to
night.
get the full photograph, but I could not get only few. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keso. Thank you, Keso. Thank you,
My pleasure,
Keso.
sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all.
My best wishes from Dimapur.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.